Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling the story of Georgy Konstantinovich Zhukov.
A huge figure,
Yeah.
absolutely central to the Soviet war effort in World War II.
Or the Great Patriotic War, as
Yeah.
it's known in Russia. We want to dig into his role, his contributions.
Right, and also that very provocative quote you sometimes hear attributed to him.
Exactly. We liberated Europe from the Nazis, and they will never forgive us for it. We'll explore that.
We've got quite a bit of material to work with: biographical details, battle analyses, anecdotes, even what contemporaries thought of him. He's a pretty rounded picture.
So our mission really is to understand his impact, especially on the Eastern Front. Look into that quote's meaning and maybe its validity.
And just get a better feel for his complex legacy.
Okay, let's start right back at the beginning. Zhukov, born 1896.
Yeah, humble origins, Strokovka village, Kaluga province.
Yeah.
Father a shoemaker, mother a peasant.
So not exactly born into the military elite.
Not at all. Very limited schooling initially, maybe 3 years. Then off to Moscow as a furrier's apprentice.
But he didn't just stay a furrier.
No, that's the interesting part. He seems to have had this real drive. Took evening courses, self-study.
That hunger for knowledge.
I think so. And that likely played a big role later on, in his military thinking.
Then 1915 hits World War I. He enlists.
Yep, Imperial Russian Army, 10th Dragoon Regiment.
And he wasn't just making up the numbers, was he? 2 crosses of St. George.
Right, those were serious decorations for bravery. Shows you something about him even then. Courage under fire, definitely.
From apprentice to decorated soldier pretty quickly.
And that trajectory just continued after the revolution in 1917.
He joined the Red Army.
And rose through the ranks remarkably fast during the Russian Civil War. That experience must have been formative.
Battlefield command, strategy, laid the groundwork.
No doubt. Probably shaped that decisive, maybe even aggressive style he became known for.
Okay, let's jump forward to the big one, World War II, the Great Patriotic War. Moscow, 1941. Things look bad.
Extremely bad. October 41, the Wehrmacht is, well, almost there. Zhukov gets the call.
Appointed to command the defense.
Essentially, yes. Chief of the General Staff, too, I believe. He steps in, and his focus is immediately on stopping the collapse.
How did he do it?
Skillful regrouping, for one. And strict, really strict discipline. He had this ability to reorganize even with everything falling apart.
Just holding the line would have been huge.
It was. But then in December, they didn't just hold. They counterattacked.
Pushed the Germans back from Moscow.
Yeah. And that wasn't just a tactical win. Psychologically, huge.
Shattering the myth of invincibility.
Exactly that. It showed the Wehrmacht could be beaten. A massive turning point, and Zhukov was right at the center of it.
Then Stalingrad, another name that just looms large.
Immense. Zhukov's role there was more about coordination, planning.
Operation Uranus.
That's the one. A really complex pincer movement. Not just the frontal assault, but hitting the flanks, exploiting the German overextension.
Clever strategy.
Very sophisticated planning.
Yeah.
And the result? Well, the encirclement of the German Sixth Army. Paulus's surrender.
A monumental victory.
Absolutely. And a devastating blow to Nazi Germany's morale.
And the scale just keeps getting bigger. Kursk, summer 43.
The largest tank battle in history. Zhukov was overseeing the Soviet side there.
The Germans were trying to regain the initiative.
They were. But the Soviets apparently had excellent intelligence about the German plans.
So Zhukov could anticipate their moves.
Precisely. They planned this deep, layered defense, let the Germans attack into it, wear themselves out.
And then counterattack.
Exactly. Blunted the German offensive, then launched their own massive counteroffensive. After Kursk, the strategic initiative on the Eastern Front definitively belonged to the Red Army. It was the last major German offensive push in the East.
Which brings us eventually to Berlin, 1945, the final push.
Right. And Zhukov led the main assault. There was apparently a bit of a race.
Competition with Konev.
Yeah, and Konev, another prominent marshal. Stalin might have even encouraged it, playing them off each other.
So Zhukov led the charge into Berlin itself.
He did. Faced incredibly tough resistance, especially at the Silo Heights. Heavy, heavy losses.
But they took the city.
They took the city. And it was Zhukov in Berlin-Karlshorst on May 9th, 1945, who accepted the formal German surrender for the Soviet Union.
So, given all that Moscow, Stalingrad, Kursk, Berlin, this quote attributed to him makes you think.
We liberated Europe from the Nazis, and they will never forgive us for it.
Yeah, it's powerful. But you mentioned the origin is a bit murky.
That's right. It's often said he mentioned it to Rokossovsky, another marshal, right there in Berlin in 45. But there's no solid public record, no definitive proof he actually said those exact words.
But the sentiment behind it.
Oh, the sentiment definitely resonated, and still does, particularly in Russia. It reflects this feeling among many Soviet veterans and later Russians that their sacrifice wasn't fully acknowledged in the West.
The sense of being underappreciated, or maybe even resented.
Both, perhaps. And that feeling likely got stronger later on, especially when some post-Soviet countries in Eastern Europe start drawing parallels between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany.
Which, from the Russian perspective, would seem like a complete distortion.
A profound distortion, yes, overlooking the liberation aspect, the sheer cost. So, whether Zhukov actually coined the phrase or not, it became a symbol of that perceived historical injustice, that lack of gratitude, maybe even hostility.
It captures a specific, very strongly held viewpoint.
Definitely. In Russia, it's often cited almost as proof of his foresight, understanding how their role would be viewed later.
Let's try and get a sense of the man himself. We have some anecdotes. What about the one where he supposedly slapped a political commissar?
Right. The commissars were party watchdogs, basically. Interfering with military matters was, well, part of their job description sometime.
But Zhukov wasn't having it.
Apparently not. The story goes he slapped one for interfering. And when Stalin heard...
What did Stalin do?
Allegedly, he just said something like, well, it's Zhukov, and let it slide.
Which says a lot about Zhukov's standing.
It really does. His perceived indispensability. Stalin, who was notoriously suspicious, basically gave him a pass. Shows Zhukov's directness too, maybe his temper.
And the horses. The captured German horses he brought back.
Yes. Stalin's dry remark, what's this? Zhukov forming his own cavalry.
It gives a little glimpse into their dynamic, doesn't it? Beyond just commander and supreme leader.
It does. A bit of boldness from Zhukov, maybe, and that mix of respect and sardonic humor from Stalin. Almost humanizes them a little.
Within that very specific, very dangerous power structure.
Exactly. And then there's the wristwatch story.
The one about him wearing loads of captured German watches?
Yeah, supposedly multiple watches on his arms at the end of the war. Probably exaggerated, and you know how these stories grow.
But it adds a different kind of detail.
A bit of a humanized one, perhaps. Spoils of war? Maybe a touch of flamboyance after all that grimness? Makes him less of a statue?
It's also really interesting what his contemporaries said. Stalin's comment is striking. Zhukov is a general who not only carries out orders, but also thinks.
High praise indeed coming from Stalin, who valued obedience above almost everything.
So acknowledging Zhukov's independent thought
means Stalin recognized his brilliance was essential, even if that independence might have made Stalin nervous later on.
And the view from the West, Eisenhower?
Eisenhower respected him, called him tough but fair, a real soldier. Recognition of his professionalism, crossing ideological lines.
And Churchill.
Churchill's quote is maybe the most powerful. When I met Zhukov, I knew. I am looking at the man who defeated Hitler. Just wow. Underscores his monumental role in the Allied victory, as seen by the other major players.
So after all this wartime heroism, you'd expect a quiet retirement, parades, but his post-war life was complicated.
Very. Initially celebrated, of course, hero of the Soviet Union parades on Red Square.
But then Stalin sidelined him.
Yes. Zhukov's immense popularity became a threat, or was perceived as one, by Stalin. Too much of a potential rival, perhaps.
So he was demoted, sent to less important posts?
Exactly. A classic Stalin move, really. Balancing power, keeping potential challengers down.
But he came back briefly after Stalin died?
He did, yeah. Under Khrushchev. Became Minister of Defense in 55.
But that didn't last long either.
No. Removed again in 57 and forced into retirement. Seems the political leadership, even post-Stalin, was still wary of his influence or perhaps his independent streak.
So he spent his later years writing his memoirs?
Pretty much. Until his death in Moscow in 1974. Stroke, at age 77.
And that detail about his burial is telling. He wanted an Orthodox Christian burial.
But the state intervened. He was cremated, ashes interred in the Kremlin wall. A final assertion of state control, perhaps, even over a national hero's last wishes.
It sums up that complex relationship.
It does. But despite all the political maneuvering, his military legacy, his strategic impact, that remains undeniable. He's still deeply revered in Russia.
Okay, so, wrapping this up, Georgi Zhukov, clearly a military giant. His leadership was absolutely instrumental in the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany, no question.
None at all. a key architect of victory on the Eastern Front.
And that quote, whether he said it precisely like that or not, it really taps into a significant narrative about how the Soviet contribution was received or perceived to be received.
It encapsulates that feeling of sacrifice being unappreciated or even twisted, especially from a Russian perspective.
His legacy is definitely complex. Military genius on one hand, navigating the treacherous politics of the Soviet system on the other.
Absolutely. Which leads to maybe a final thought for you, our listener, considering Zhukov's huge role and that sentiment in the quote. How does the way World War II is remembered in different places?
You mean the different national narratives?
Exactly. How do those different memories shape things today? Geopolitics, our understanding of each other.
Can one massive historical event be seen in such fundamentally different ways?
And what does it mean if it can? What are the implications of those divergent stories that we tell ourselves about the past? Something to mull over.